With the resounding success of the first two installments in the Crash Bandicoot franchise, the third game was absolutely guaranteed. The Orange Australian already had a very substantial fanbase at that point, having especially garnered a very large audience in the Eastern Hemisphere. Be that the mind-blowing at the time amount of official disc sales in Japan, or the almost unparalleled popularity of Crash Bandicoot via the distribution of bootleg discs in Eastern Europe, Middle Eastern regions, and other places where the official way to play video games would have been a very restrictive and an incredibly expensive luxury. Which is actually how I got introduced to Crash, because my parents owned a small collection of bootleg PS1 games when I was a kid, and Crash Bandicoot was my mother's favorite game series. Seeing her play the original trilogy, especially Crash 1, is what enamored the little baby me to the very idea of video games. Thanks, Mom. And having earned his reputation and place as one of the main faces of PlayStation and their less than official mascot at the time, thanks to the immensely charming, brimming with fantastic atmosphere and wonderfully fun to play first two games, Crash 3 had a lot of anticipation to live up to. So let us see whether or not Crash Bandicoot 3 warped stuck the landing.
Azrael, wake up! There is a horribly horrendous crisis that threatens the entire world. The planet needs you, and it needs you right now.
Go away, Aku Aku. I just got off work and all I want to do is just take a good old nap.
You do not understand the severity of the situation, Azrael. It is my evil twin brother, Uka Uka. I sense he's up to his evil schemes yet again. However, this time I sense a presence of another in his plans. Your arch-nemesis, Professor Uka Context. He has returned.
Context? I thought he had a heart attack. Isn't he supposed to be, dead?
Yes, and in the first review you literally exploded him into smithereens, yet he somehow survived. Apparently, Context is a tougher nut to crack than you might have initially presumed, but that is besides the point. I sense temporal shenanigans. Someone's altering the very fabric of space and time. Uka Uka and Context threaten the entire history of creation. They must be stopped.
Either way, I don't care and it doesn't concern me.
Just let me have my day off in peace, man. Go deal with your supervillain thing on your own.
I see. Perhaps I did not make myself clear enough. The entirety of the world's history is in danger. How will you be able to sleep at night knowing you could have prevented eternal damnation? If we do not step in and stop these villains right now, they will alter the course of entire history to that of eternal tyranny and evil.
Dude, I make less than minimum wage. I don't give a shit.
Well, in that case, if I recall correctly, Professor Uka Context still owes you that $5, does he not?
Alright, what do I do?
After Crash had collected and brought all the gems to Dr. Embryo last time, and they together destroyed Cortex's space station, one of the bits of debris crashed straight into a temple somewhere on one of the Wumpa Islands. A temple that for many generations held a powerful ancient evil at bay. Turns out that Dr. Cortex was not the real mastermind behind the past two games all along. Some time ago, Dr. Cortex was contacted by the spirit of Uka Uka, a malevolent witch doctor, whose vile soul lives on in a tiki mask, much like his brother Aku Aku. In fact, Aku Aku was the one to defeat and seal away Uka centuries ago. Uka Uka had chosen Cortex to become his herald of destruction and world domination, telling him exactly how to harness the energy of the gems and crystals and instructing him on how to conquer the planet. Unfortunately for Uka Uka, Cortex has been thwarted both times by the one who was supposed to be the mutant general of their armies, the manic marsupial, the orange anarchist, Crash Bandicoot himself. But in his latest failure, Cortex had inadvertently rescued him with the rubble of Neo's space station crashing into the very temple which housed Uka Uka's underground prison as stated previously. Upon being released, he berates Cortex for his defeats, but also offhandedly gives him props for how Cortex's ineptitude also led to his freedom. And right off the bat, we have a major difference to discuss between the original and the insane versions of Crash Warped. The original frames Uka Uka in this unnatural arcane veil of darkness. He glows with malevolence and pure evil throughout the entire scene, as he should. His visage isn't even revealed initially. But the Insane Trilogy version of the intro has Uka fly into the scene as that same glowing blue energy sperm he escaped the imprisonment as, only to erupt and reveal his face in way too colorful of a way for what is supposed to be an ancient, almost eldritch embodiment of cruelty and villainy. And don't get me wrong, I really appreciate all the effort that went into animating his expressive tantrum, but that's what it is, a tantrum. The understated creepiness of the original Uka Uka's introduction worked as the perfect first impression for the big bad of the entire franchise. And I think a middle ground of sorts could have worked pretty well actually. Retain all of Uka's animations and enraged floating around, but have him be clad in that magical shadow throughout. That way you give him the cartoony and slightly goofy expressiveness, but while also retaining some of his original intimidation factor. However, there's also a matter of voice acting, and no offense to John DiMaggio, who is one of my favorite voice actors of all time, and I know he can do this role well. He can be a fantastically menacing villain. On a side note, his Joker is the perfect clown prince of crime. But in that particular scene, I don't know why, maybe it was due to poor direction, but Uka Uka's performance in the Insane Trilogy just doesn't quite hit for me. Especially compared to the menacing presence of Clancy Brown's Uka Uka in the original. But either way, this time around Uka Uka has brought another high-profile lackey not only to ensure that his dastardly schemes go smoothly, but also because having lost all the sources of magical power they acquired in the last two games, there are presumably no more undiscovered gems and crystals left on the planet, which is why they need to travel across all of time and acquire the energy jewels from all sorts of different points in human history, which is why Uka Uka chose Dr. Nefarious Tropy, the inventor of the Time Twister machine that will be used throughout the entirety of the game. So I guess Uka Uka keeps tabs on all sorts of promising supervillains just in case. Not gonna lie, that's actually pretty clever.
Nikola Context, the greatest evil professor of literature. I've observed your career with great interest, and I, the mighty Uka Uka, now offer you a chance to strike back at the pitiful planet that denied you your glory. Join me as my prophet of doom, and together we will reshape history to our liking. Also, I understand it would have been far more dramatic to appear to you in the middle of the night, but you usually keep your windows closed at night, so... Oh yeah, and remove that red N insignia off of your forehead immediately. That is copyright infringement on the intellectual property of one of my lackeys. Alright, so I am the mighty Uka Uka. I offer you total world domination, rewriting history and whatnot. Are you in?
Upon hearing the unmistakable vile cackling of his villainous brother erupt in the distance, Aku Aku knows exactly what just happened. And so, Aku, who is now confirmed to be a parental figure of sorts for our heroes, a character dynamic that I absolutely adore. Making Aku the kind of mentor and a father to the Bandicoots is the dynamic I wish was touched on more throughout the series. As I was saying, Aku gathers Crash, Coco, and Polar, who's now Crash and Coco's family pet, another very adorable dynamic I can't get enough of, and the one that has unfortunately not received almost any attention after Warped. Anyway, Aku tells the Bandicoots of Uka Uka and the threat he presents to our world, and so our brave heroes set out to stop him. Using his magic, Aku sneaks Crash and Coco onto Entropy's Time Twister, which will serve as the game's hub, with a series of 5 warp rooms with 5 level portals in each of them, and a secret 6th warp room. Thus reusing the level structure from Crash Bandicoot 2, which will go on to become an iconic formula within the franchise. Later appearing in one form or another in Crash Bash, The Wrath of Cortex, Huge Adventure, and Entranced. Similarly to Crash 2, every warp room differs from one another with its visual aesthetic, and while the Crash 2 warp rooms were designed around the present time environments, true to its time travel related themes, the Crash 3 warp rooms are designed after the different historical periods and places we visit. The first warp room has a medieval European castle sort of aesthetic, the second is designed after the Arab stages, the third is clearly inspired by the Orient style of the Great Wall of China levels. The fourth warp room is designed like the interior of levels set in ancient Egypt, and the 5th warp room represents the potential dystopian future, with the secret 6th warp room further expanding on the themes of the said dystopian future while referencing Terminator 2, with its Skynet-style factory, which produces copies of Dr. Cortex's mechanical lab assistants, dressing them up in era-appropriate attires and sending them out into different periods of time to collect the energy sources for him and Uka Uka. Among these sources, the returning power crystals from Crash 2 that yet again serve as the primary collectible required to finish the base story, the also returning gems, and the newly introduced in the original Crash 3 at least, time relics. The time relics, as their name suggests, can be earned through the act of speedrunning the levels in a certain amount of time. Finally living up to Crash 1's joke pitch title of Sonic's ass game, I see, Naughty Dog. Not bad. There are 3 tiers of relics, from easiest to hardest, Sapphire, Gold, and Platinum. Similar to the different ranks in Sonic levels, except, unless I'm mistaken, Crash technically did it first, with Crash Warped coming out in 1998, and the first Sonic game to introduce the ranking system being Sonic Pocket Adventure, which was released a whole year later. The time trials for each level are unlocked upon beating it once and can be activated by simply touching the floating golden clock at the start of each stage. This triggers the timer to go off, checkpoint crates to despawn, and some other crates to get switched around to either nitro or yellow time stop crates that pause the timer upon being broken for however many seconds it says on a given box. And so the time relics would go on to become just as much of a staple of the franchise as the gems and crystals. And starting with Crash 3, they will be crucial for completing and earning the true ending in more Crash Bandicoot games to come. For some people, this feels rather gimmicky, and I honestly really understand it. The Crash levels are usually designed with patience and exploring in mind, which obviously leads to more of a slow and deliberate pace, and for some players, me included, encountering the time trials for the first time was incredibly jarring, because it so suddenly flips the pacing on its head, demanding speed and determination above all else. This, at least in my case, makes full completion of the game a bit more of a tedious endeavor compared to Crash 1 and 2, due to the feeling of running against the clock in any kind of game making me generally nervous. However, as years went by, my approach to the time trials in Crash Bandicoot games has changed. I started using the time trials as a way to simply replay any given level in one go while also removing any and all risk, because dying during a time challenge does not increment the life counter. And so, over time, especially in my teens, I really started to enjoy collecting the relics, getting into the flow state and enjoying the pace and rhythm of the levels. However, not all time trials are made equal, and I still feel that some stages just don't hit the mark when it comes to speedrunning. So my advice to anyone new to completing the Crash games would be to not go for all the relics straight away, at least not if you're easily burnt out by them. Take it at your pace, learn the level through the time trial first, get accustomed to its layout, and then try and do it faster and faster, and then you will succeed. Though I do realize that I don't even need to say any of this for some of you speed demons out there, who given the chance would knock out the platinum time relics alongside the crystals and gems all on your first go. I do think that overall the introduction of relics was a good choice, but depending on the game, I'm still not entirely convinced that they should always be pivotal to unlocking the true ending. But that is a topic of discussion much more appropriate for later reviews. And while we're on the topic of stuff introduced in Crash 3, I should also mention that the game's very structure as a platformer has been changed quite noticeably by significantly bumping up the percentage of gimmick levels. Something that in fact the original game's very intro proudly and boldly presents by having Crash, Coco and their collection of vehicles burst out of the giant Naughty Dog crate, which in my opinion perfectly sets up the grand pathos of Crash's biggest adventure yet. And I love that this intro style was later reused in Crash Team Racing. For understandable reasons, the high prevalence of variety levels in Crash Warped is a rather contentious addition, as the game is now split in half between honest-to-Wumpa-God's platforming and gimmick levels. And please do not get me wrong, I'm not using this term as something negative. No, in fact I think that the said gimmicks are all rather well executed, being both technically sound and actually engaging for the most part, which is something I will elaborate on later in the video. But for now, the main thing I want to focus on is the balance between controlling Crash and classic kicks on the ground breaking boxes levels and everything else. I do believe that Crash 3 really feels like it lacks platforming levels, with them only accounting for 15 out of 30 total levels, which means that 3 entire warp rooms could be filled with just variety levels alone. The problem is that some of these levels, like the motorbike and the jet ski stages, repeat up to 4 times. So had there been more levels in total, like perhaps 5 more platforming stages, which would necessitate each of all the 5 standard warp rooms to have an extra level, or perhaps adding 1 more warp room with an extra boss, the game's structure issue would have honestly been mitigated. However, taking into account that game development is no easy feat, and developing 5 whole extra levels with an additional boss fight on top of that would have potentially been hell on poor devs at Naughty Dog, who were simultaneously working on CTR in the middle of making Warped. I think a much simpler solution is in order. Simply have all the gimmick levels only repeat twice, which would bring their number from 15 down to 10. Giving us those 5 extra slots for standard levels. Levels that could either expand on one of the time periods already explored in the platforming stages, or reuse the aesthetic and assets from some of the vehicle levels. Like, wouldn't it be fun to freely run and jump around in ancient China or atop of one of those pirate ships? Hell, I know for a fact that a lot of you who played the game in their younger years were heartbroken at the fact that there was no proper level set inside of that giant Cortex skull island. Well, at least I was. Oh man, younger me would have killed for a platforming level like that.
Your booty now belongs to me. Huh, what's that?
Wait, is that context? I gotta stop him before he fucks up the timeline even more. Speaking of level design for the classic platforming style stages, aesthetically these levels are just wonderful. Being set in such environments as the fantasy-inspired European Middle Ages, the prehistoric times full of unadulterated dinosaur fun, the atmospheric ancient Egypt, the gorgeous old Arabic cities, and the totally hypothetical and not at all frighteningly possible potential ultra-consumerist future, where Dr. Cortex has secured his victory, splattered his end branding all over the place, and became the law. In fact, a recurring detail I really love is that Cortex and company have left their noticeable marks in each and every one of these time periods, almost like they're trying to rewrite history in their favor. Very devious indeed.
Listen here, you primitive savages. This is called a book, and you will read it.
Yes, motherfucker!
Hello, non-specific man. I would like you to spread my word. Here, I call it the Bible. Oh, yes, taking credit for anything I want. Oh, yes. And no one can stop me. Nikola Tesla. Oh, no. More like Nikola Context. Yes. Alright, let's go over our list, shall we, Uka? Check. Oh, now to figure out how can we do even more evil. I know. What if we make discrimination institutional? Oh goodness, Uka Uka, institutionalized discrimination? That's evil, horrific, even from my standards, but you are the one in charge, so who am I to argue? Alright, since you gave your idea, how about on the way, we ruin the life of that miserable Austrian painter from the 20th century? I've always loathed his paintings. Let's make sure he never gets into that art school.
However, despite how good the platforming stages look, I do have to admit that for some of them, especially the medieval ones, the level layouts feel noticeably way more corridory than the previous two games. They are just way too tunnel-like and crampy, not to mention that the difficulty feels a bit too reduced for my liking, with both platforms and stage hazards presenting little to no real challenge most of the time, making Crash 3 the easiest to finish the base game in out of the entire trilogy. This simplification of the game's standard levels is likely the result of introducing the time relics, and especially the fact that those are required for full completion. Due to the fact that had they suddenly necessitated speedrunning the more typically challenging levels, it would have easily aggravated a very large part of the player base. So I can kind of understand this choice, even if the simpler levels of Crash 3 used to always massively hinder its replayability for me. But when it comes to full completion, Crash 3 does thankfully crank that challenge factor back up, both through the requirement of collecting the time relics. With every time you get 5 relics of any kind, even your basic sapphire ones, you unlocked one of the portals in the Secret 6 warp room, though especially useful are the higher tiers of relics, as collecting all gold relics is how you get the final secret gem from Coco in the hub area, and bump up your completion percentage to the full 105% in the original. And of course, the now certified Crash Bandicoot classic of collecting all the gems and figuring out all the new cryptic secrets behind unlocking some of them. This time, the two major bullshitty secrets that a lot of people believe needed more of a hint are A. Hitting the road sign with a picture of an alien head drawn on it in one of the bike levels, and B. Getting deliberately captured by a pterodactyl in one of the prehistoric stages. Both of these are used as the only way to access the game's two extra secret levels, being Hot Cocoa and Oedipus Rex. And while I can see the logic behind the road sign one, during your first go or maybe while replaying the stage, the particular odd and out of place sign will catch your attention, hopefully, or well, at least it's supposed to. But considering that this is a race stage and you will only ever slow down in one of these if you're going for the box gem, I can see most players not even paying any attention to the sign at all. At least that's the way it was in my case. Back when I was a kid, I would just drive by all the signs, not even taking notice of them, until a girl from my class pointed out the alien sign in that level to me. And honestly, I gotta give small props, but props nonetheless, to the Insane Trilogy version of the game. Because in that level, the devs added a small blue bird that flies past you and smashes right into the sign. Honestly, a great hint. On top of the fact that the remake trilogy always has a small tip alerting the player to a given level's secret. So while I'm kinda torn half and half regarding the sign and road crash, the pterodactyl in Dynamite just feels utterly random. It's like Naughty Dog were banking on the player either stumbling upon it on a total accident or looking it up in one of those video game strategy guides that used to be a rather popular thing before the invention and popularization of the internet. And honestly, on paper, I love the idea of being carried away by one of the winged dinos as a way to access a secret level, but the hintless execution in the original kind of baffles me. And there's a really damn simple fix I believe Naughty Dog should have implemented. Simply recolor the pterodactyl, make him red or baby blue or just any shade other than the rest of them, which would immediately bring the player's attention to it. Gotcha, bitch! And now the time has come to discuss the variety levels that alter the way our main characters control and move around. And yes, characters as in plural, and not just in the Insane Trilogy where Coco can be played as in the base levels throughout all 3 games. Because the original Crash Warped is the first time we play as someone other than the titular character. However, in the original Crash 3, Coco is only playable in her own vehicle levels, where you can play as her and only her. And the same goes for the Pura and Jet Ski levels in the Insane Trilogy, where Crash cannot be played just like in the original. But the Insane Plane levels are interchangeable, because in the original, both Crash and Coco had aerial levels, and thus their mechanics themselves are interchangeable. I must say, Coco's animal riding levels control rather well, pretty much feeling the same as the polar and hog riding levels from the previous 2 games, with the main difference now being the visual of riding a precious little tiger across the Great Wall of China as it undergoes construction. This aesthetic is gorgeous, especially at nighttime. And the controls are a good balance between tight and floaty, and collecting box gems on these levels can be quite exhilarating, even if there is an occasional moment of frustration. Which is not surprising, since the animal riding levels always stay the closest to the mostly linear corridor platformer style formula of Crash Bandicoot. The jet ski levels, meanwhile, offer a far greater freedom of movement in a 3-dimensional space. And they look just so damn beautiful. Mad respect to Naughty Dog for their breakthrough in designing wide open oceanic areas with actual water physics around and in spite of the console limitations at the time. Playing these wonderfully liberating levels for the first time is something I wish I could re-experience. That first immediate burst of dopamine is impossible to forget. And in regards to the difference between the original and the Insane handling of the jet ski, I do have to admit, while the Insane handling did throw my muscle memory off quite a bit at first, I have grown rather accustomed to it at this point, and I don't think it's that much worse than the original. Though as the initial novelty fades, just like the bike levels, having 4 jet ski stages feels excessive. And speaking of bike levels, these feature Crash Bandicoot experiencing the best of good old 60s Americana has to offer, giving me major American Graffiti vibes with all the drag racing and cop evading. And yet again, I adore the aesthetic of these levels. However, despite the fact that the 2 games were being worked on simultaneously, this is no Crash Team Racing, as the bike control feels off just enough to make speedrunning the stages for relics or accurately aiming at the crates for the gems incredibly irritating. Hell, even getting the base crystal can be a bloody nightmare because of the sheer twat behavior of the enemy AI. And these levels frequently piss me off in both versions of the game, because the bike handles almost like it's a goddamn truck at times. The control issue could have been mitigated or at least made less prevalent if only there were less of these stages. I reiterate, having the aforementioned 2 level types repeat 4 times is just way too much. But also, brand new to Crash 3 is the introduction of a very divisive video game trope. Some people dreaded, others tolerated, and very rare few like it. I bring to you the infamous concept of water levels. And honestly, Crash Bandicoot Warped executes this concept really well in my opinion. Crash wears scuba equipment, so there's thankfully no frustrating drowning mechanics like in a lot of other games. He controls really well and responsively, while also having that bit of drag that you'd expect to feel underwater. Additionally, there's also another vehicle thrown in, a small scuba jet thingy Crash grabs onto that serves as an extra hit point and as a ranged weapon, due to its ability to shoot torpedoes. And these projectiles are crucial to breaking otherwise indestructible corals that have grown over some of the crates in these levels, meaning the player has to be a little bit extra careful in order to not get hit and preserve the scuba jets so that they could destroy all the boxes within a level, and earn the box gem. This is actually a very good and rewarding little mechanic if I do say so myself. Also, a bit off topic, but for the longest time I thought that in these levels we were swimming through Dr. Cortex's underwater bases or something, but I have recently realized upon doing some research that these levels are apparently all set within the sunken ruins of Atlantis, so that's pretty cool actually. I have no idea how I never thought of that. And out of all the gimmick stages, I must say the underwater levels are definitely the ones that have the most replayability for me. They control well, they have good level design, and way better pacing than most other gimmick levels. And the final variety level type is the airplane stages. These levels feature Crash or Coco flying in their airplanes, fending off enemy pilots with their plane-mounted machine guns, in surprisingly intense dogfights while trying to destroy priority targets such as Dr. Cortex's war blimps or bombers. Wait. Intense dogfights, war, blimps, biplanes. Some of the enemy aircraft design resembles the Red Baron. Holy shit, this is World War I! So our bandicoots are courageously fending off the Central Powers' air forces in the skies of war-torn Europe. When I first played these levels when I was a kid, I was both shocked and impressed that Crash 3 got away with adding actual war-themed stages into the game. And while this definitely wouldn't be allowed without a higher PG rating, I do wonder what could have been if there were actual on-the-ground platforming levels set within this time period. I reckon Crash's firearm that he obtains later in the game would have come in real handy.
I must get crystal for Professor Context and Uka Uka, oh yeah! Who are you? What are you doing? No, don't get... No!
I just killed more than 2 dozen men. I think I enjoyed it.
Have legs anymore, you fucking moron!
I didn't sign up for this. I just came here for a goddamn crystal because some schmuck owes me $5 fucking dollars.
Azrael, get up on your feet immediately! I understand this is a hard time for you right now, but our enemies are on the precipice of victory! We cannot let them get away!
What do you want from me? I can't do this anymore! I just came here because some schmuck owes me $5 to get a goddamn crystal!
But the world's in
Fuck the
danger.
world! I don't want to stop him anymore, I just want to go home!
I see that the fate of the world does not concern you, but let me speak to you in your own language, Azrael. You choose to let the evil bastard who owes you $5 get away. You choose to give up and no longer fight for what is yours. You choose to be a bitch and a pussy. So get up off of that snow immediately. Be better than that. Prove me wrong. Prove that you are more than a weak coward. Fight back against the evils of this world, and not just for your own selfish gains, but for the sake of every human being that has ever been wronged in all of history. Get up and prove me. Prove yourself. Prove that scumbag Context that you will not lay down and be defeated. Get your $5 back and save the world.
What? Yeah, you know what? You're fucking right. Yeah, fuck that guy.
Down! They got a whole ass fucking Zeppelin!
Though among the air levels, there's one that isn't focused on combat. That being Rings of Power, where your primary focus is racing against your foes through a series of giant Superman 64 style green rings. And for the most part, the airplane levels control really well. I must also commend the introduction of a health bar for our characters, in order to make the dogfights feel fair and not have the player die every time a stray enemy bullet hits them. And healing by shooting down the medical supply crates is just perfect. I love it. Though the race mechanic in Rings of Power will take some getting used to, it kind of feels like a bit of a bitch at first. But overall, mechanically I have absolutely zero issues with any of these levels. Much like the jetpack stages last time, these serve as a pretty good gimmick to break up the game's pace with. All this talk of vehicles and modes of transportation, and of course, how could I forget Baby T? The newborn T-Rex who controls like a charm and is just absolutely adorable. So yeah, I have no critiques for that fella. His segments are just a pleasure to play, honestly.
Oh, by Valhalla, a man who can read and dress! Bow to him, bow to him!
Man who can actually read!
Oh, yes,
My leg.
Archduke Ferdinand, get down!
Oh, that's a headshot right there, and the bullet is still going.
I think I might have also killed Archduke Ferdinand with that shot.
You did.
Fuck.
Yup.
Really? This is the only point in history when we can do this. Are you kidding me, Aku Aku? Like, not any earlier. Not when he's younger. Not when we can prevent any of the shit he's done.
I didn't think you'd want him to take his life on his own terms.
Of course I'm not gonna let him do it himself. He's not the one to make that choice, no.
What are you doing in my
Hey, listen, shut the fuck up, mustache man. We're not even talking to you.
Like that?
You've been evading me and my partner right here for a long-ass fucking time. I even tried to go back in time and kill you when you were a fucking baby, but
to kill me as a
somehow
baby.
we've been thwarted.
Oh, don't
And this
you me,
apparently
I am
is the only time in all of history when we can shoot you.
But I was already
So,
going to take my own life.
No. You don't get off that easy. Now, how about we aim for that crotch first? Oh, damn. Looks like I'm gonna have to bash you to death. You know, this was oddly therapeutic. Not as fulfilling, not as satisfying as I wish it would have been. Probably would have felt a lot better if we could have prevented any of this. You know, any of the shit that he's done. But, you know, this was still fun. So how about we go to that dystopian future and, I've heard they sell actual lightsabers there. That should be fun. Alright, I know I have already gawked at the Crash Bandicoot bosses twice now. Well, their designs, that is. Because Naughty Dog and Charles Zimbillis have been knocking it out of the park with every single named character so far being immensely memorable in terms of their looks and personality. And this time is no different. The newcomers in the faces of Uka Uka, Entropy, and Dingodile all look awesome and have fun, unique traits to boot. Uka Uka is an ancient evil monster bent on corrupting and dominating everything in his path. He is the most cruel and malicious character in the entire franchise, which could come off as a bit two-dimensional. The irony of him being a flat piece of wood on top of that is not lost on me. But he fills a very much appropriate and needed role of the overarching big bad, a mythological sort of archetype of evil. akin I suppose to that of Apophis, or more fitting in Uka's case, Set of Egyptian myth. Dingodile being a hungry pyromaniac Aussie who'll bloody roast you like a barbecue, mate. And Entropy being a smug, proper old bastard from the future, intent on proving he's far more capable than that pitiful plebeian Neo-Cortex. I'll say this again, all of them are immensely memorable as characters. And while on a technical level, when it comes to pure gameplay, previous games would occasionally have a weak or lackluster encounter like Pabu Pop or Koala Kong in Crash 1, or an absolute piece of trash like the fight against Cortex in Crash 2, this time every boss fight is good. They all feel intense, energetic, and fun as all hell. Naughty Dog deserved the highest of praise for yet again delivering fantastic character designs while also making damn good and uniquely satisfying fights for each of them. On top of that, this time, upon defeating a boss, Crash will be granted a power-up, sort of like how the Mega Man series does this. Except the abilities Crash gains are not something that's literally taken away from the defeated foes, though that would be something I'd really like to see the series tackle in the future. The first boss we fight in Warped is Tiny Tiger, who is yet again the biggest badass in the game, this time wearing gladiator armor and facing off against his Bandicoot nemesis in the Roman Colosseum. And befitting a gladiatorial battle, this is an absolute spectacle of a fight. The power-up we get after defeating Tiny is the Super Body Slam, which extends the range of Crash's belly flop's shockwave, allowing you to destroy more crates around you. A rather weak power-up in my opinion, as outside of some speed and challenge run strats, it's mostly used to break a slightly larger gathering of reinforced crates in one go without having to belly flop multiple times, so given that the reinforced crates are something the player has already been able to deal with ever since the introduction of Crash's basic body slam ability last time, and Crash 3 not giving us any kind of super reinforced crate or some other mechanic that would necessitate a more powerful slam, I do feel that this power-up feels quite situational. Not terribly so, like you can use it to add some variety to how you deal with large and packaged gathering of boxes, and that already is way more than what I can say for a power-up from a certain sequel, but this ability is situational nonetheless. The second boss is Dingodile, and he makes a real good first impression, being a cruel old bastard threatening an innocent little penguin before turning around to face Crash and promising that he's gonna roast him with his flamethrower. And that's all the motivation our manic marsupial needs to kick his ass. I genuinely love the mechanics of this boss fight. The multi-layered crystal shield with every layer being a distinct color to intuitively help the player tell them apart and be ready to react on instinct when they see an appropriate opening to strike. And of course, speaking of these openings, they are made when Dingodile gets frustrated enough at the fact that his blind mortar-style shots didn't kill Crash, that he starts blasting his own cover just to get a better shot at the orange bastard. Pummeling this dastardly half-dingo, half-croc is just immensely satisfying, both when fighting him the dev-intended way, and even when cheesing it by using the slide spin jump technique I talked about in the last review. And the power-up we get from defeating the Aussie Arsonist is the ability to double jump. Hell yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. A proper upgrade to our moveset. The game's third boss is surprisingly Dr. Entropy. Given how he's a brand new high-ranking villain being brought in by Uka Uka to oversee and make sure Cortex doesn't fail, and the fact that he's the inventor of the very time machine we use throughout the game, I think we all kind of expected him to be the penultimate boss fight. But either way, this is another really strong boss fight, serving as a test of the player's platforming skills by making them avoid the myriad of projectiles launched by Tropy, and navigating the platforms that appear when the insidious inventor is winded to strike him. And as Tropy gets defeated by our fuzzy orange hero, we acquire the Death Tornado Spin upgrade, which allows Crash to glide over platforms and to cosplay as Taz the Tasmanian Devil. Another awesome power-up. Up next is the game's most visually and mechanically stunning fight, Dr. Engine, this time donning a certified Wumpa Fruit proof and significantly upgraded mech suit. He faces off against Coco in space, where Crash's fearless little sister needs to shoot down the rocket-headed angry Austrian. Unlike the fight against Cortex and Crash 2, this is how you design a boss fight around the mechanics of a gimmick level. The controls from the flying stages translate really well into an intense one-on-one space dogfight. And just look at how much health Engine has! And even after decimating his health bar, making him lose crucial parts of the mech's arsenal, it's not over yet, because he has a whole second phase! Just like when Brio turned into a giant hulking brute back in Crash 1, seeing Engine pull this off back when I first played the game just blew my mind. Except this is a way cooler encounter. And to help Coco deal with the Engine's mech's second form, an orange spaceship flies in, connecting itself to Coco's for extra firepower. Being piloted, of course, by her big brother Crash... Wait. It's not Crash, but instead... Pura? A little tiger cub that Coco stole from ancient China? How and why is he piloting a spaceship? You know what? I don't care about the logistics. The fact that our craft also gets a power-up and that somehow the supposedly non-sentient little tiger can fly a weaponized spaceship is just dumb and cool in the best way possible. And after Coco and Pura totally obliterate Engine's war machine, we are gifted the most unexpected of upgrades. A freaking firearm! Hell, it's a goddamn bazooka! And not just any bazooka, a Wumpa bazooka utilizing the most common resource in the franchise for its projectiles to make sure that Crash never has to run out of ammo. And despite what it may initially seem, and what I am absolutely certain the devs must have definitely considered for a bit at some point, shooting the bazooka does not affect your Wumpa counter, so you literally have an unlimited supply of ranged destruction. Technically turning Crash Bandicoot 3 warped into Naughty Dog's first ever 3D third-person shooter adventure game. In retrospect, foreshadowing the future to come.
Alright, we repaired the timeline as best as we could. I'm still shocked that so much of it cannot be fixed. Well, not by us anyway. Alright, how about we pay that bitch Context a visit?
And how exactly do you suppose we find him, Azrael?
Ha! That's why I brought him along. And this. So, Pipsqueak, mind telling us where your boss is?
No, please. I'm just a hired gun. I'm just a hired gun to do this. He's in Cyprus. He's in Cyprus. There's like a supervillain hotel. It's a resort. It's a supervillain resort in Cyprus. Just don't kill me.
Now there we go. Wasn't that so much simpler, huh? Alright, let's get that out of there. Aww. Sorry about the eye.
But before we talk about the game's final boss encounter, let's take a moment to quickly discuss the design of the regular platforming stages yet again. As I mentioned earlier, the primary levels are overall noticeably easier than those of Crash 2 and especially Crash 1. Some stages, mostly the medieval and future levels, have the issue of feeling too much like a straight and narrow track, and while there's most definitely an intentional reason for it, my assumption at least is that they are designed this way in order to be made easier to speedrun for relics. Literally feeling like a racetrack so that the average player would more naturally grow accustomed to the newly introduced collectible. However, given that none of these levels are long enough to really necessitate such drastic simplification, I do think that this was an unnecessary sacrifice that waters down what could otherwise have been a far stronger selection of levels. This does not in any way ruin the levels, mind you, but they could and in my opinion should have been better. Though after my latest full replay of the game, I do have to say that some levels, especially the ancient Egypt ones, knock it out of the park, easily becoming some of my favorite levels in the whole series. Interesting and creative hazards, solid platforming and great enemy placement. Mwah, absolutely beautiful. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the colored gem stages are as fun as ever, with the ultimate gem path making a return from Crash 2 and now becoming a staple of sorts within the franchise, where the game's final platforming level, excluding any potential secret levels and extra warp rooms, will have a route only fully accessible via collecting all the colored gems. A mechanic that I personally absolutely adore, such a genius addition. And speaking of the final platforming level, whoever over at Naughty Dog decided to do this at the end of Bug Light, thank you! The sheer unadulterated sense of power as we're given 3 Aku Aku crates for guaranteed invincibility, a ton of nitros to smash through as this epic final lap, potentially the last hurrah before fighting Cortex, is just such a damn cool idea.
Where's Context?
Listen, man, they're all crazy down
Where is Context?
Hell, he's just behind that door. Just let me be.
Alright.
Such uncivilized weaponry.
Alright. Luckily, this time, the final battle is not a letdown like last time. This time, the encounter is much grander in scale as our orange anarchist is up against not only his arch nemesis Dr. Cortex, but also the one who's really in charge, the nigh limitless force of evil that is Uka Uka, who is so powerful in fact that Aku Aku immediately intervenes to protect Crash and vanquish his vile sibling once more.
Oh, well, what do we got? My brother, your reign of terror ends now.
This is the most creative boss fight so far. The stakes have been raised even more since last game, as now if Crash is to lose, his foes would be able to have full and unmitigated control over the world's history from start to end, dooming Earth to an eternal hellish dystopia. The fight consists of avoiding not only Cortex's series of attacks, but also staying out of the way of the Dragon Ball mixed with Looney Tunes style duel between the two Tiki Masks, who will immediately evaporate Crash on contact. And the music that plays only adds to the nerve-wrackingly insane intensity of this fight. After a certain amount of time, as Cortex throws down some landmines, the blue bubble shield around him flickers off, giving the player an opening to punch him in his hepatitis-ridden neon yellow face and smack him over to the hole in the middle of the room. Do that 2 more times and Cortex is toast. A rather short but really sweet and satisfying encounter.
Winded already.
All you had to do was just give me my $5, man. Was that so fucking hard?
The fight with Cortex at the end of Crash 3 is a worthy finale to the Bandicoot's most dangerous adventure yet. But what about the game as a whole? Does Crash Bandicoot 3 work as a fitting end to the original trilogy? Personally, yeah, I think so. And while it doesn't reach the heights of Crash 2, it's nonetheless a great game. Though it is a game that could have been greater. It could have even surpassed Crash 2 had it had a better balance between the platforming and gimmick levels, had the bike levels controlled better, had some of the platforming stages not been dumbed down. I genuinely believe this could have been the best game out of the original 3 easily. And I can genuinely see why a lot of people prefer it over Crash 2. And with that said, the original Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped gets 8 out of 10. Despite my gripes, the game is still more than solid and technically sound. Aesthetically, it's fantastic. The boss lineup is mechanically the strongest in the franchise. The power-ups are fun and engaging, and most of its levels range from good to great. And as for the Insane Trilogy version, yet again, it does not quite live up to the Naughty Dog version in my opinion. The visual issues prevalent in the Crash 2 remake can still be seen here, though not as bad. Honestly, the jet ski and bike stages I think actually look gorgeous here. The vehicle levels have been changed and do feel quite a bit off. Sometimes it's easily manageable, but others it just doesn't work for me. But I will give Vicarious Visions credit, their brand new original level Future Tense is a wonderful addition, making me wish we had a whole dedicated warp room of levels designed by them as DLC. Hell, I'd have paid for that. And so the Insane Crash 3 gets a 7.5 out of 10. And if I were to give each trilogy as a whole a score, it would go as such. The original Crash Bandicoot trilogy gets 8 out of 10, and the Insane Trilogy gets a 7 out of 10. I do highly recommend playing the original games, especially if you can emulate them, as in case of Crash 1 with its infuriatingly archaic save system, having save states would make it way more satisfying to complete. You know, and also being able to play these games in sharp full HD resolution is just honestly a treat. Thank you, DuckStation. But do not be discouraged to play the Insane Trilogy if that's your only option. It is a solid remake. Yes, quite by the numbers, and my issues with it stem from what is most likely the result of Activision's infamous tendency to meddle with and rush the production of their games. But overall, this is the most available way to play Crash 1, 2, and 3, as it can be purchased on all platforms. So for example, if you're playing on console, I do recommend, even if not as strongly as in the case of the original, seeking out a copy of the game, be that new, used, or digitally on sale. Or if you're an Xbox player, I think it should be available on Game Pass. So if you haven't, or you know someone who hasn't but might be interested, give the Crash trilogy a try, be that Naughty Dog or Insane.
But definitely try and play the original if you can.
And with that said, until next time, my wonderful lads, lassies, and everyone in between, take care.